How's it going, everybody? CJ here, back with another video. With every banning comes winners and losers. Obvious losers, Jewel Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Dockside Extortionist, but there's a lot of winners to be looking at too, and today we're going to be talking about those. I developed a system that lets me monitor both the prices and the quantities of cards on TCG Player for each individual card, and whenever I run these stats, I can compare them to the last time I ran them and see how things are changing for them. So far, this has been pretty good at predicting when cards would go up in price due to quantities leaving the market. As supply drops, prices go up. That's just how it works. And so if you're able to figure out, oh, this card's dropping in supply pretty rapidly, there's a decent chance that thing's going to go up in price. I just so happened to have ran the numbers the day before the banning, and then I ran them today. So we're going to compare the stats. I will be pulling out certain cards that I think are worth mentioning, and we're going to be talking about how some cards are changing in the market. Some of them being a little more obvious than others because they're a little late to the boat. But after that first one, we're definitely late to the boat on, there's other ones that are really looking good. Before I hop into that though, remember, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, this video series is going to be continuing outside of just this banning, just monitoring card prices and inventories and such. However, patrons and members will have early access to these videos. Seems pretty cool. Just become a member, help support the channel. So let's dive on into this. The first card that everyone knows about is Mana Vault. Mana Vault already spiked up in price. Quantities went crazy low on everything. Mana Vault's expensive now. It's a pretty decent replacement for Mana Crypt, but it's not Mana Crypt. It's still a good card though. But we're here to talk about the less obvious cards. And there's a lot of less obvious cards that are fast mana. A lot of fast mana cards that are pretty cheap have been moving. The first card I want to mention is Soul Talisman. All 4 versions of Soul Talisman have been draining from the market since the banning. The regular version had 482 copies on the market before the banning, and now it's down to 356 copies, which is a pretty substantial difference. It's a 26% drop. The Extended Art followed suit with an even heavier drop. It went from 222 listings down to 160. The retro frame had the smallest difference among all of the Soul Talismans. There were 229 in the market the day before the ban. Now there's only 201. It's not a huge drop there, but the other ones have some pretty significant drops. However, the retro frame foil etched has the biggest drop out of all of them. It went from 115 copies to 62. That is a 46% drop in inventory. That's a very substantial amount. The price has also not changed too much on any of these. The foil etched had the biggest price change, makes sense. It went up about $1. Well, the other ones are in like the 10 to 50 cent range for price increases. So there's probably room to grow, especially if more people think Soul Talisman is a good replacement for any of this fast mana. Next up we have Lotus Petal, specifically the original Lotus Petal. We just got into the reprint and mystery boosters, so I don't think that there's going to be much demand for the other versions, or as much demand for the other versions I should say. The original copies tend to see more movement first, so that could be why, but Tempest Lotus Petal is seeing some movement. Saw a 35% drop. It went from 275 copies down to 180. Saw a couple buck price difference there, but that's a pretty strong drain. Next we have one of the more expensive pieces of fast mana. Grim Monolith is seeing some movement. It saw a 26% drop going from 139 copies to 103. So that's a pretty good difference, especially for a card at this price point. Jeweled Amulet is a big mover here. 36% decrease and the price barely changed. This card a lot of people just don't know about. And it's good enough that it's been in Vintage Cube before, like on MTGO. Like, this is a strong card. It went from 267 copies down to 170. That's a lot of movement, especially considering this card only has 1 printing. And the last piece of fast mana I wanted to mention is Lotus Bloom. A lot of Lotus Blooms are seeing a ton of movement in the market. The original printing had a 23% drop going from 168 copies down to 129. And it had 2 master set printings, which saw an even steeper decrease in quantities. One of them went from 93 down to 58 copies available, and the other one 243 down to 152 copies available. That's a 38 and 37% drop in inventory. That's pretty substantial. Out of all those, I think Jeweled Amulet might be the spiciest one. There's only one printing. It's an old printing from Ice Age, and it's seeing pretty substantial drops, and it has uses outside of trying to be a replacement for any of these cards. It's just a very good card. So that might be one that I could see seeing more of a price jump. Moving on, one of the other things that they mentioned in the ban announcement was regarding their silver border project. We happen to have 2 silver bordered cards that saw pretty drastic movement. The first one is Jack in the Mox. There are 2 printings, one of which went down 47%. Yeah, 47%. 51 copies down to 27 copies. That's insane. While the other printing went from 86 copies down to 62. Pretty big drops. And the other had a 53% drop, with Name Sticker Goblin, specifically the Galaxy Foil, had the bigger drop. The other one also had a pretty substantial drop of 24%. The Galaxy Foil went from 64 copies down to 30, while the regular version went from 354 copies down to 269. Those are some big drops. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the silver bordered stuff in case more cards start showing that there's some movement. And now I'll just talk about some additional cards that are relatively unrelated to the ban list, but have seen some pretty drastic movements and are worth noting. There's the Showcase Scrolls Cavern Hoarder Dragon. That card has been draining from the market. Went from 48 copies down to 24 without a price change. And that's a 50% decrease. That's pretty substantial, and it's a very strong card, so I could see that moving up in price pretty heavily. A lot of cards from the Lord of the Rings set, the Showcase Scroll ones, are moving in inventory. Like, they're draining from the market. People are buying them out. It's because they're from the holiday box, and everything from that holiday box is money. So it looks like the Showcase Scrolls are the next thing to get pushed into that realm. Interestingly, we had both versions of Emberwild Captain on this list. Neither of them had insane movements, but they both had movements for multiple weeks in a row. The base version, for the last 2 times I ran these numbers, dropped 25% both times. Currently, there are only 142 copies on the market. Prior to the ban, there were 190. And the extended art had a 30% drop the week prior, and this week a 19% drop. And the number of copies in the last week went from 73 to 59. Hellish Rebuke is another card that seems to be draining from the market. This one I'm not really sure why as well, but it seems like a pretty good card. The regular went from 78 copies to 52. Another card that's been drained from the market that I'm pretty sure is related to one of the new precons from Duskmourn is Chandra Awakened Inferno. There's 2 versions of it, and both have been draining pretty hard. The reprint version had 2 massive drops in a row, being 72% and then 36%. Currently, there's only 25 copies on the market. That's going up. That's crazy. Those are insane drops. While the original printing had a 46% drop and then a 31% drop down to 106 copies on the market. This seems like a card that could easily end up very expensive. Rolling Vortex is seeing inventory changes for the same reason, and similar numbers where it's back-to-back weeks of big drops. The extended art went down 34%, then went down another 29%, leaving just 61 copies on the market, while the regular version went down 59% and then 24%, down to only 82 copies on the market. All of these cards are draining pretty quickly, and the precons aren't even in most people's hands yet. Anyone that ordered it online probably doesn't have them yet. They're going to want these cards for upgrades. These are going to go and drain from the market further and probably going to get pretty pricey, especially the Chandras in my opinion. Another card that's been moving because of these precons and new Duskmourn cards is Zur Internal Schemer. All 3 versions of Zur have seen insane inventory changes since like August. The base copy has had 3 time points in a row of big decreases in volume. 23%, then 34%, and most recently 51% drop, down to just 89 copies on the market. Similarly, the Showcase went down 29, then 20, and now 37%, down to 183 copies on the market. And the Textured Foil has seen the biggest drops. 48%, 35%, then 30% drops, down to just 30 copies on the market. That's nothing. And the price has gone up a very small amount, like maybe $1 or $2. Then we have 3 versions of Sulfim that have been moving a lot over multiple time periods. The base version had a 41% decrease previously, and most recently, just a 12% decrease. It's down to 184 copies on the market. That's pretty notable. I'm not sure exactly how long the time frame is going to be on this one for when is the right time to buy, but it is worth noting, especially because all three versions had similar trends. The Step Incomplete went down 24% and then down another 14%, and the Showcase went down 35%, then 27%. And then just a couple of cards to keep an eye on because they're not doing heavy changes, but they're definitely standing out to me. High Noon, both versions have seen some minor decreases over and over and over again in volume, so that might be one to look at. High Noon's an interesting one. 20-Toed Toad is another card that's seen minor decreases, but over a period of time, multiple minor decreases. And it's an interesting new card. Newer cards are kind of harder to pinpoint on. And lastly, Storm Splitter. Same type of thing as 20-Toed Toad. Let me know what you guys think about this type of content, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.